From popular Pac-Man to Elden Ring, there is 42 years of age difference. Today, there are over 5 million games in existence. From high-speed racing adventures to fast-paced shooting games, there is genre for everyone to enjoy. So, how did all of this happen? I'm Ehsan Mehdizadeh. This is OldGameRise, Revolutionary Days of Video Games. The term video game has evolved over the decades from a purely technical definition to a general idea, defining a new class of interactive entertainment. Technically, for a product to be a video game under early definitions, it needed to transmit a video signal to a display. That could be oscilloscope, vector scan monitor, CRT, LCD, and so on. This definition would exclude early computer games that outputted results to a printer or teletype rather than a display, as well as games that use static LCD graphics, for example Nintendo's Game & Watch, or most Tiger Electronics handhelds. From a technical angle, these would more properly be called electronic games or computer games. Probably the first video game created simply for entertainment was 1958's Tennis for Two, containing moving visuals on an oscilloscope. As computing technology improved over time, computers became smaller and faster, and the ability to work on them was opened up to university employees and undergraduate students by the end of the 1950s. These new programmers began to create games for non-academic purposes, leading up to the 1962 release of Space War, as one of the earliest known digital computer games to be available outside of a single research institute. By the mid-1970s, low-cost programmable microprocessors replaced the discrete transistor logic circuitry of the early hardware, and the first ROM cartridge-based home consoles arrived, including the Atari Video Computer System. Coupled with rapid growth in the golden age of arcade video games, with Space Invaders and Pac-Man, the home console market also flourished. Video gaming reached mainstream popularity in the 1970s and 1980s when arcade video games, gaming consoles, and home computer games were introduced to the general public. Since then, video gaming has become a popular form of entertainment and a part of modern culture in most parts of the world. Video games transitioned into a new era in the early 1970s with the launch of the commercial video game industry in 1971, with the display of the coin-operated arcade game Galaxy Game and the release of the first arcade video game Computer Space. And then in 1972 with the release of the immensely successful arcade game Pong and the first home video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, which launched the first generation of video game consoles. The Magnavox Odyssey never caught on with the public, due to the limited functionality of its electronic component technology. By mid-1975, large-scale integration microchips had become inexpensive enough to be incorporated into a consumer product. Magnavox reduced the part count of the Odyssey using a free chipset, and released two new systems that only played ball and paddle games, the Magnavox Odyssey 100 and Magnavox Odyssey 200. Atari meanwhile entered the consumer market that same year with the single-chip home Pong system. The next year, General Instrument released a Pong on a chip (LSI) and made it available at a low price to any interested company. Toy company Coleco Industries used this chip to create the million-selling Telstar console model series. In 1977, Atari released the Atari 2600, also known as the Video Computer System, a home console that featured joysticks and interchangeable game cartridges that played multicolored games, effectively kicking off the second generation of the video game consoles. Development costs of dedicated game hardware for arcade and home consoles based on discrete component circuitry and application-specific integrated circuits, with only limited consumer lifespans, drew engineers to find alternatives. Microprocessors had dropped far enough in price to make this a viable option for developing programmable consoles that could load in-game software from a form of swappable media. The Fairchild Channel F by Fairchild Camera and Instrument was released in 1976. It is the first home console to use programmable ROM cartridges, which allows players to swap games, as well as being the first home console to use a microprocessor which read instructions from the ROM cartridge. Atari and Magnavox followed same technology, both systems also introducing the use of cartridges. Just as dedicated consoles were fading in popularity in the West, they briefly rushed in popularity in Japan. These were often based on licensed designs from the American companies, made by TV manufacturers such as Toshiba and Sharp. Notably, Nintendo entered the video game market during this period alongside its current traditional and electronic toy product lines, producing the series of color TV game consoles in partnership with Mitsubishi. After the ball and paddle market saturation in 1975, game developers began looking for new ideas for games, maintained by the ability to use programmable microprocessors rather than analog components. Taito designer Tomohiro Nishikado, who had developed Gunfight previously, was inspired by Atari's Breakout to create a shooting-based game, Space Invaders, first released in Japan in 1978. Space Invaders introduced several important concepts in arcade video games, including play regulated by lives instead of timer or set score, gaining extra lives through gathering points, and the tracking of the high score achieved on the machine. It was also the first game to confront the player with waves of targets that shot back at the player, and the first to include background music during the gameplay. Space Invaders was an immediate success in Japan, with some arcades created solely for Space Invaders machines. Space Invaders considered to be the golden age of arcade games, which lasted for 4 years. Several influential and best-selling arcade games were released during this period from Atari, Namco, Taito, Williams, and Nintendo, including Asteroids, Galaxian, Defender, Missile Command, and Galaga. Pac-Man, released in 1980, became a popular culture icon, and a new wave of games appeared that focused on identifiable characters and alternate mechanics such as navigating a maze or traversing a series of platforms. Aside from Pac-Man and its sequel Miss Pac-Man, the most popular games in this vein during the Golden Age were Donkey Kong and Q*bert. Games like Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, and Q*bert also introduced the concept of narratives and characters to video games, which led companies to adopt these later as mascots for marketing purposes. While programs written in BASIC or other simple languages could be easily copied over, IBM released the first of its IBM personal computers in 1981, shipping with the MS-DOS operating system. IBM PC was designed with an open architecture to allow new components to be added to it, but IBM intended to maintain control on manufacture with the registered BIOS developed for the system. As IBM struggled to meet demand for its PC, other computer manufacturers such as Compaq worked to reverse engineer the BIOS and created IBM PC compatible computers by 1983. By 1987, IBM PC compatible computers dominated the home and business computer market. The Apple Macintosh also arrived at this time. In contrast to the IBM PC, Apple maintained a more closed system on the Macintosh, creating a system based around a graphical user interface operating system. As a result, it did not have the same market share as the IBM PC compatible, but still had a respectable software library including video games typically ports from other systems. From a video games standpoint, the IBM PC compatible restored further game development. A software developer could write to meet the IBM PC compatible specification and not worry about which model was being used. While the initial IBM PC supported only monochromatic text games, game developers nevertheless ported mainframe and other simple text games to the PC. IBM introduced video display controllers such as the color graphics adapter, the enhanced graphics adapter, and the video graphics array that expanded the computer's ability to display color graphics. The first dedicated sound cards for IBM PC compatibles were released starting in 1987, which provided digital sound conversion input and output far exceeding the computer's internal speakers. In 1983, the North American video game industry experienced a major crash due to a number of factors, including an oversaturated game console market, competition from computer gaming, and a surplus of overhyped, low-quality games, such as the infamous E.T., often considered the worst game ever created. The Atari VCS market became weakened with large quantities of poor-quality games. These games did not sell well, and retailers discounted their prices to try to get rid of their inventory. This further impacted sales of high-quality games, since consumers would be drawn to purchase bargain bin price games over quality games marketed as a regular price. Lasting a couple of years, the crash led to the bankruptcy of several home computer and video game console companies. The video game home industry began to recover in 1985 when the Nintendo Entertainment System, called Famicom in Japan, came to the United States. Nintendo, a Japanese company that began as a playing card manufacturer in 1889, released a number of important video games franchises still around today, such as Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, and the Metroid. Launched Nintendo Power magazine to provide tips and tricks as well as news on upcoming Nintendo games. Also in 1989, Sega released its 16-bit Genesis console in North America as a successor to its 1986 Sega Master System. With its technological superiority to the NES, clever marketing, and the 1991 release of the Sonic the Hedgehog game, the Genesis made significant headway against its older rival. In 1991, Nintendo released its 60-bit Super NES console in North America, launching the first real console war. Sega's SG-1000 did not fare as well against the Famicom in Japan, releasing Sega Mark III, also known as the Master System, in 1985. Whereas Nintendo had more success in Japan and the United States, Sega's Mark III sold well in Europe, Australia, and Brazil. The early to mid-1990s saw the release of a wealth of popular games on both consoles, including new franchises such as Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat, a fighting game that represented blood and gore on the Genesis version of the game. In response to the violent game, Sega created the video game rating console in 1993 to provide graphic labeling for every game sold on Sega home console. The console later gives rise to the industry-wide entertainment software rating board, which is still used today to rate video games based on content. With a much larger library of games, lower price point, and successful marketing, the Genesis had leaped ahead of the Super NES in North America by this time, but Sega was unable to find similar success in Japan. In addition to transition to optical media, the industry entirely had a major shift toward real-time 3D computer graphics across games during the 1990s. There had been a number of arcade games that used simple wireframe vector graphics to simulate 3D, such as Battlezone, Tempest, and Star Wars. A unique challenge in 3D computer graphics is that real-time rendering typically requires floating point calculations. In that time, most video game hardware was not well suited. Instead, many games simulated 3D effects such as by using parallax rendering of different background layers, scaling of sprites as they moved towards or away from the player's view, or other rendering methods such as the Super NES Mod 7. These tricks to simulate 3D rendered graphics through 2D systems are generally referred to as 2.5-dimensional graphics. The fifth generation of video games accompanied in the three-dimensional era of gaming. Advancements in microprocessor technology gave rise to real-time 3D polygonal graphic rendering in game consoles, as well as in PCs by way of graphics cards. Optical media via CD-ROMs began to be incorporated into personal computers and consoles, including Sony's fledgling PlayStation console line, pushing Sega out of the console hardware market while diminishing Nintendo's role. Sega and Nintendo each released their fair share of highly rated on-brand 3D titles such as Virtua Fighter on the Saturn and Super Mario 64 on the Nintendo 64. The established video game companies couldn't compete with Sony's strong third-party support, which helped the PlayStation secure numerous exclusive titles. During the 1990s, Microsoft introduced its initial versions of the Microsoft Windows operating system for personal computers, a graphical user interface intended to replace MS-DOS. Microsoft developed DirectX in 1995, later integrated into Microsoft Windows 95 and future Windows products as a set of libraries to give game programmers direct access to these functions. Sony dominated the video game market and would continue to do so into the next generation. In fact, the PlayStation 2, released in 2000, able to play original PlayStation games, would become the best-selling game console of all time. However, a new player entered the console picture at this point: Microsoft with its first Xbox console. Microsoft entered the console hardware market in the early 2000s with its Xbox line, fearing that Sony's PlayStation, positioned as a game console and the entertainment device, would displace personal computers. While Sony and Microsoft continued to develop the hardware of comparable top-end console features, Nintendo chose to focus on innovative gameplay. Nintendo developed the Wii, the motion sensing controls, which helped to draw in non-traditional players and helped to rescue Nintendo's position in the industry. The Dreamcast, considered by many to be ahead of its time and one of the greatest consoles ever made for several reasons, including its capability for online gaming, was a commercial failure that ended Sega's console efforts. Sega pulled the plug on the system in 2001, becoming a third-party software company henceforth. Nintendo still dominated the handheld game market during this period. The Game Boy Advance, released in 2001, the next two major handhelds, the Nintendo DS and Sony's PlayStation Portable, within a month of each other in 2004. The DS's two screens, with one being a touch-sensitive screen, proved extremely popular with consumers, especially young children and middle-aged gamers, who were drawn to the device by Nintendo's Nintendogs and Brain Age series respectively, as well as introducing Japanese visual novel type games such as the Ace Attorney and Professor Layton series to the western regions. PSP attracted a significant portion of veteran gamers in North America and was very popular in Japan. As affordable broadband internet connectivity spread, many publishers turned to online games as a way of innovating. Massively multiplayer online role-playing games feature significant PC games like RuneScape, EverQuest, and Ultima Online, with World of Warcraft as one of the most successful. Other MMORPGs also were released, such as Second Life, which focused mostly on social interaction with virtual player avatars and user creations, rather than any gameplay elements. Historically, console-based MMORPGs have been few in number due to the lack of bundled internet connectivity options for the platforms. These made it hard to establish a large enough subscription community to justify the development costs. The first noteworthy console MMORPGs were Phantasy Star Online on the Sega Dreamcast, followed by Final Fantasy XI for the Sony PlayStation 2. Microsoft's Xbox also had its own online service called Xbox Live. Xbox Live was a huge success and proved to be a driving force for the Xbox, with games like Halo 2 that were highly popular. In 2005 and 2006, Microsoft's Xbox 360, Sony's PlayStation 3, and Nintendo's Wii kicked off the modern age of high-definition gaming. Without the PlayStation 3, the only system at the time to play Blu-rays, was successful in its own right. Sony for the first time faced stiff competition from its rivals. The Xbox 360, which had similar graphics capabilities to the PlayStation 3, was praised for its online gaming ecosystem and won far more Game Critics awards than the other platforms in 2007. Despite being technologically inferior to the other two systems, the Wii conquered its competition in sales. Its motion-sensitive remotes made gaming more active than ever before, helping it appeal to a larger slice of the general public, including people in retirement homes. From the 2000 to 2010, the industry has seen a shift of demographics as mobile gaming on smartphones and tablets displaced handheld consoles, and casual gaming became an increasing larger sector of the market, as well as a growth in the number of players from China and other areas not traditionally tied to the industry. To take advantage of these shifts, Traditional revenue models were supplemented with ongoing revenue stream models such as free-to-play, freemium, and subscription-based games. As AAA video game production became more costly and risk-averse, opportunities for more experimental and innovative independent game development grew over the 2000s and 2010s, aided by the popularity of mobile and casual gaming and the ease of digital distribution. Hardware and software technology continued to drive improvement in video games, with support for high-definition video at high frame rates and for virtual and augmented reality-based games. Towards the end of the decade and beginning of the next, video games spread to social media platforms like Facebook and mobile devices like the iPhone, reaching a more casual gaming audience. The 8th generation of video games began with the release of Nintendo's Wii U in 2012. Followed by the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One in 2013. Despite featuring a touch-screen remote control that allowed off-TV gaming and being able to play Wii games, the Wii U was a commercial failure, the opposite of its competition, and was discontinued in 2017. In early 2017, Nintendo released its Wii U successor, the Nintendo Switch, the only system to allow both television-based and handheld gaming. Microsoft released its 4K rated console, the Xbox One X, in late 2017 and followed up in 2020 with the Xbox Series X and Series S. Sony also released the PlayStation 5, a successor to PlayStation 4. With their new revamped consoles, both Sony and Microsoft currently have their sights set on virtual reality gaming, a technology that has the potential to change the way players experience video games. We saw video game has improved drastically over 50 years. In upcoming years, with the help of AI, we will witness the growing of technology. Thanks for watching, see you next time.